Good day to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to speak on a subject which is close to my heart and mind, not only a scholarly subject. And special thanks to you, Anton, bedankt, for paving the way on denialism of mass crimes and atrocities and genocides, because it leads to my summary of Germany's evasive handling of colonial crimes it committed. And while I'm a strong supporter of free speech, I'm aware of the pitfalls of free speech, because then you get lost in the details and you exceed the time limit. So bear with me that I'm going to read out a text I prepared, as boring as it might be, but it helps me to stay within the 10 minutes. And when I was running the test this morning, I was clearly shorter than 10 minutes. The German Kaiserreich was at the beginning of the 20th century the fourth biggest colonial power. Any one of you knew that? Since 1884, it declared Southwest Africa, Togo, Cameroon, East Africa, and some South Sea islands, including Samoa, as its property, to which it added the Chinese leased territory Tsingtao. Hundreds of thousands colonized lost their lives through direct or indirect colonial violence. The first genocide of the 20th century took place in Southwest Africa, where apartheid became a German invention. Ending with World War I, colonialism was widely degraded to a mere footnote of German history. In West Germany, it was mainly perceived through uncritical lenses. In East Germany, the colonial archives, then based here in Potsdam, and the support of the anti-colonial struggle fostered a critical historiography. As different as these engagements were, they had no impact on a memory culture among the wider public in both countries. This changed with unification. Civil society made inroads in the public discourse. Post-colonial initiatives, Afro-Germans and scholars engaged with the brutal forms of German colonialism and entered mainstream debates, if only with limited impact. But it opened new frontiers. In 2015, meaning 110 years after it took place, the German government for the first time admitted that the warfare in Southwest Africa was genocide from today's perspective. From today's perspective is a very important legal reference point, because it highlights intertemporality, which I cannot explain now, but feel free to ask me during the debate. German-Namibian government negotiations resulted in a controversial joint declaration not yet adopted. This contributed to increased debates how to come to terms with the past in the present. The so-called traffic light coalition of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberal Party declared in its coalition agreement of December 21 the reconciliation with Namibia is an indispensable task of historic and moral responsibility. It promised to tackle as part of its cultural policy colonial continuities. But except an intensification of provenance research and the restitution of some looted artifacts and human remains, little else happened. In response to an interpellation, a self-critical diagnosis of 31st October last year concedes that Germany's colonial past has been for decades a non-theme in politics and society, and was wrongly so pictured as relatively harmless because of its short duration. That this changed in recent years was attributed to civil society. It admits that the treatment of Germany's colonial past remains a task still at the beginning. The State Minister for Culture and Media in the Office of the Chancellor tried in 2024 to add to the framework concept of memory culture colonialism to the pillars of the Nazi regime and the GDR. But it also suggested a fourth pillar on migration. Since the official memory culture has an exclusive focus on state-responsible injustices, the proposal failed. A final effort to rescue the colonial dimension by deleting migration came only when the coalition had collapsed. The new discourses provoked colonial apologetic revisionism, rejecting post-colonial efforts as a guilt complex. A draft resolution submitted by the right-wing AfD to Parliament in December 2019 argued that German colonialism contributed to the liberation of the African continent from archaic structures. It called on the government to develop a commemorative culture that acknowledges the beneficial aspects of the German colonial era, to promote such perspectives in school curricula, to oppose demands for reparations, and to keep street names with colonial reminiscences. It bemoaned a paradigm shift since German unification and accused critical colonial historical studies being indoctrinated by East German ideology. It accuses the left spectre of imposing its normative interpretation of the past as the dominant view and of victimizing those sympathetic to the idea of a colonial civilizing mission. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation has since, in its public history portal Geschichtsbewusst, introduced a thematic focus headed Postcolonialism, Attack on the West. Postcolonialism is accused of discrediting the legacy of European Enlightenment as Western cultural imperialism. It warns that postcolonial criticism of an enlightened universalism and the West is a threat to social cohesion. This is indicative for the new cultural policy presented in the election campaign of early 2025. Just like the AfD, the CDU and CSU reanimated the term Lied culture, Leitkultur. The current government of CDU, CSU and SPD entered in May 25 a coalition agreement. It deals with colonialism in 3 sentences without mentioning Namibia any longer. It declares to keep an eye on creating a dignified place of memory for colonialism, but there is no mention of this under memorials or elsewhere. Such initiative would be a task for Wolfram Weimer, appointed as State Secretary for Culture and Media in the office of the Chancellor. In a book declared to be a conservative manifesto, he advocates a new positioning of old values and affirmatively refers to Oswald Spengler's Der Untergang des Abendlands of 1918, translated as The Downfall of the Occident. For him, multiculturalism necessitates a reminder that good old things still exist. He rebukes the do-gooder patronizers and moral know-it-all, in German Gutmenschen, Bevormunder and moralische Besserwisser, for a loss of substance in a fun-fair society. He calls it Jahrmarktgesellschaft. In an article after his appointment, Weimer opinionated that cultural wars are rarely about culture, but over the power of definition, ideas and perspectives. Last month, Weimer presented his new state memory concept, in which colonialism is not mentioned once. Such selectivity by omission is tantamount to memory failure.